Hi everyone, here's the Book Chemist once again. Today I'm reviewing the Radetzky March by Joseph Roth, a classic novel that was on my radar, has been on my radar for a long time. I resisted it for the longest time because I thought it would be boring, but instead completely blew me away. I was engrossed throughout its entire length, and I was crying like a lamb as I read its final chapter and especially its final couple of pages. Where I'm from, the name Radetzky, the Austrian Field Marshal Joseph Radetzky, is fairly well known. In the mid-19th century, he was the commander of the Austrian garrison in Milan at a time when Lombardy, the Veneto parts of northern Italy, were under Austrian rule. And he was expelled from Milan following the 5 days insurrection in 1848, which was the local chapter of the continent-wide, the European revolutions of 1848. He was expelled from the city, but he returned a few months later following the debacle and the defeats of the Italian War of Independence. This was regarded as an extraordinary comeback. After the 5 days insurrection, Vienna had basically given Lombardy for gone. They'd already resigned to having lost that territory. And Radetzky's military triumphs really invigorated the Habsburg Empire, and they were seen as a highlight of the counter-revolution that followed the 1848 Revolutionary Spring. The victories were so well received that Johann Strauss composed a march, a musical piece to celebrate Radetzky, the Radetzky March, which is one of those pieces of classical music that we all know, even though we might not know its name. We might not know that we do. Just Google it, just listen to it on YouTube. You will definitely have heard it either in a movie or maybe in an ad on TV. And this piece of music, the Radetzky March, was very beautifully described by Joseph Roth as the Marseillaise of conservatism. Roth's novel actually starts a few years after Radetzky's death. It starts with the Battle of Solferino in 1859, where, to simplify things, Lombardy ultimately gained its independence from Austria. And in the course of this battle, the life of the Austrian Emperor, Franz Joseph, is saved by a common soldier who pushes him off his horse and comes in the way of a bullet, takes a bullet for the emperor. This humble Slovenian officer is elevated to the aristocracy. He becomes a baron as Baron Trotta von Cipolje, and he is forever known as the hero of Solferino. The novel starts from this point and talks about the life of 3 generations of Trottas of this family: the hero of Solferino himself, his son, who is forbidden from joining the military and becomes a civil servant instead, and his grandson, Karl Joseph, who joins the military first in the cavalry and later in the infantry. I gave this very long introduction, and I apologize for it. I'm a bit of an 1848 nerd, and I hope I haven't been mansplaining Radetzky to you. But I gave this introduction because I think appreciating the significance of the Radetzky March in Habsburg imperial culture is really fundamental to appreciating the relevance of this piece of music in the course of the novel. The Radetzky March is played time and again in the course of the book as a celebration of this great historical moment from the dual monarchy for the Habsburgs, the celebration of this unlikely triumph. Whenever Karl Joseph hears this march, his feelings of patriotism are ignited, and he feels ready to die for his emperor and to sacrifice his life for the ideal of this great empire and this great monarchy. The majesty of this piece of music, which is actually at once triumphant but also very light, it's triumphant in a rather effortless, joyous way. The majesty and crystalline beauty of this is pitched against the reality of a world that is changing fast and not necessarily for the better. The hero of Solferino at the beginning of the novel resigns from his military career because of a factual mistake in the way his actions during the Battle of Solferino are reported in the school texts of the Habsburg Empire. He is so opposed to falsehood and hypocrisy that he just can't stand that thought, and he gives up his career for the sake of that. 2 generations later, Karl Joseph, the grandson, is by no means a bad man. In many ways, a lot of his neuroses and his hang-ups very closely resemble his grandfather's, but his life takes a completely different shape. He gets mired in murky scandals. He becomes responsible almost against his better self for the misfortune and even the death that befalls a lot of people around him, and eventually gets entailed in scandalous gambling debts. Meanwhile, the Habsburg Empire, which is this institution that is supposedly divinely ordained and should technically be as eternal as God himself, is seen as torn between the splendor of its surface, of its parades, of its music, and the reality teeming and bubbling under the surface, the social and nationalist unrest that everywhere across this empire threatens to bubble over and to explode into conflict. Any novel that can move between the historical sphere and the very private personal sphere of its characters so effortlessly, showing how the two are deeply connected and related, is going to be up my alley and is going to be of interest to me. And what made the Radetzky March such a powerful and surprising experience was that it feels incredibly modern for a novel that was published in 1932 and that deals with one of the most antiquated empires in Europe, really one of the last relics of the Ancien regime, at least on the surface. Between the two of us, I'm not sure the Ancien regime ever really left us. In fact, it seems fairly healthy to me even these days. But let's not digress. This book can talk about lust, about greed, about cowardice, about self-repression, as well and as clearly as any contemporary novel. But it is also capable of expressing a very genuine, very unironic degree of sadness for the passing of a lost world. This is a book about generational change and political change. The characters in this book really fully understand and can tell, whether they admit it to themselves or not, that the young generations and the world they're growing up in has nothing to do with the world of the dual monarchy, with the empire, with the institutions and the values that they knew growing up. These people know that there won't be a place for them in the world of the future, but they generally they face it with a certain degree of dignity. They face it with sadness, but also with courage, if you will. Perhaps that's another reason why I found this book very relevant. I read it just after having spent many a holiday meal in the company of my boomer relatives, complaining about the kids of today, wondering what their values are, wondering whether they even care about anything. And in many ways, this generational lack of comprehension very much reminded me what you encounter in the pages of Roth's novel. As far as I understand it, Joseph Roth was actually quite the apologist for the dual monarchy, the empire, and the Habsburgs, but he doesn't paint them as a holy family at the top of a holy land in the course of the novel, far from it. In fact, Emperor Franz Joseph himself, which appears as a character a few times in the course of the book, is mostly depicted as a fairly childish, fairly foolish old man, a figurehead that serves a function in this empire, but is part of this great creaky machine rather than the person who is commanding it and calling the shots. It's a very honest and frank novel. It's clearly aware that with the passing of this age and the collapse of the Habsburg Empire, a lot of antiquated and lifeless values are going to be swept away. For instance, the very formal, very airless, very stifled and repressed way fathers and sons interact in the course of the book is very much seen as a function of these highly dignified, highly honorable times. And the book doesn't seem to miss it. It doesn't seem to paint this type of family relations as something that should be missed. But the novel is also clearly aware that with the passing of this age, a lot of things that were also good and honorable and beautiful are going to disappear too, especially because the event that is ultimately going to spell the end of the Habsburg Empire is the horror of the Great War, which with both its immediate and later consequences and its immense hellish cost. The beautiful elegiac tone of the novel is captured most intensely for me at the beginning of chapter 8. I'm going to read this paragraph because it's the book in a nutshell for me, and it's really, really beautiful. It follows the death of two of the characters in the book in a duel that they fought against each other. In the years before the Great War, at the time the events chronicled in these pages took place, it was not yet a matter of indifference whether a man lived or died. When someone was expunged from the lists of the living, someone else did not immediately step up to take his place, but a gap was left to show where he had been, and those who knew the man who had died or disappeared, well or even less well, fell silent whenever they saw the gap. When a fire happened to consume a particular dwelling in a row of dwellings, the site of the conflagration remained for a long time afterwards. For masons and bricklayers worked slowly and thoughtfully, and when they walked past the ruins, neighbors and passers-by alike recalled the form and the walls of the house that had once stood there. That's how it was then. Everything that grew took long to grow, and everything that ended took a long time to be forgotten. Everything that existed left behind traces of itself, and people then lived by their memories, just as nowadays we live by our capacity to forget quickly and comprehensively. Considering I am in no way a fan of the Habsburgs or their empire, not even in a nerdy historiographical way, I was really blown away by Roth's beautiful elegy for this world, by its capacity for capturing its flaws, its cracks, but also its beauty, its potential for bringing together in peace countless different people in a cosmopolitan, unified situation where their traditions were respected when they were all coexisting with one another. I thought it was an amazing novel, and for what it's worth, my edition, this is the Granta edition translated by Michael Hofmann, included a beautiful introduction that really expanded my appreciation of the book in a very natural, very, very beautiful, illuminating way. Introductions, often I can take them or leave them. This one was really, really well written and insightful. If you can get this edition, or at least this translation, get your hands on it. Hoffman remarks in the introduction that Roth is one of those authors who is mostly read for one book, which is the Radetzky March, but actually produced a much broader oeuvre, and I'll have to do justice to that oeuvre. I'll have to sample more of his books. If you have recommendations for what else of Joseph Roth I should read, do let me know. I'm very curious. Thank you so much for watching this video. Let me know if you also love the Radetzky March or not in the comments, and bye everybody.